Today we're going to be talking about what happens when progress is visible before it's measurable. We're going to be thinking about reading fluency and discernment, and also World Book Day. Progress does not begin as the data appears. In classrooms, the earliest signs of progress are tiny little signals that change is underway. Maybe a steadier gaze, a sentence that holds together, a child who no longer avoids reading. These moments rarely register in the data, yet they do signal progress. Teachers understand this instinctively, and maturation does not accelerate in time for the next assessment. It actually emerges when the underlying structures are ready. The question is not about whether progress is evidence-based, but whether we know how to recognise it at these early stages. With World Book Day approaching, this distinction is key. Children are acutely sensitive to what adults celebrate. If we value display, they notice. And if we value depth, they notice that as well. And this is why discernment matters. Discernment requires patience in the same way that we wait and watch for the tiny signs that spring has almost arrived. The growth of adult teeth offers a useful parallel. As teachers, we know that when a 7-year-old child's adult teeth come through, it's one of the biggest signals of their maturation. Although unseen, adult teeth develop beneath the surface before they emerge. And we know that waiting for this to actually unfold is a natural part of maturation. If we are looking for ways to elevate the work that we already see in classrooms, there's wisdom that comes from waiting, but we need to know what we're waiting and watching for. We must take care not to disturb and disrupt the development that is already underway. So, there is a delicate balance between looking for progress, waiting for progress, and expecting even greater progress. With World Book Day just around the corner, let's think about the difference between stopping versus stepping back and knowing when to reduce pressure. Not very long ago, a Key Stage 2 class teacher asked me whether I thought a particular child was stressed, as this child's parents were very ambitious for them, but they were showing signs of strain. The child's word recognition was highly accurate, their rate of reading was brisk, but their comprehension was weak. They were articulate and asked many questions about their own learning and showed prodigious self-awareness, but also an abundance of self-scrutiny. The values they had absorbed were that reading was a means to an end. There was little expectation or desire to experience reading as a form of social reciprocity between the author and reader, to feel free of judgment and observation. In this instance, stepping back from scrutiny to allow the natural balance between the child and their interactions with others was probably the best thing to do. But there are also many children in Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 who have received repetitive phonics intervention for at least 5 years, but for whom reading does not click into place. Being targeted for extra help has not helped and may not be helpful in terms of building the child's identity as a learner by the time they get to Key Stage 3. Stopping something that's not working may indeed be the most rational and ethical decision to take. Stopping and stepping back are often necessary. But a third option, which is a group intervention in which the children are characterised as the helpers rather than those needing help, could be a strong alternative. Now, I always tell the children that I work with that I need them to help me to learn about learning to read. Their eyes really light up as they're flattered and delighted to be invited and eager to be helpful. Inviting children to help subtly shifts their expectation and their social standing. Let's think now about World Book Day and reader identity and what the children are actually noticing about value. When we celebrate World Book Day, we are signalling different values to different children. The symbolic internal experience of the children really matters, even more than does the outward display of dressing up as a character from a favourite book. You see, for many children who enjoy reading and have access to books, World Book Day is a joyful expression of their identity as a reader. And having empathised with the protagonist of a fabulous book and inhabited that character's internal world for however long, it may be affirming for them to extend their identity and to appear as that character for one special day in the school year. But in the world of child development, identity as a reader can be very fluid or fragile or even uncomfortable, with World Book Day amplifying that discomfort. Of course, there's more to World Book Day than creating a carnival-like display. There's depth as well, because teachers do care deeply that every child becomes a reader. It's not just that, but teachers care that children read with depth of engagement, genuine delight in the understanding that only fluent reading can actually bring them. Children are primed to notice what adults value, whether that's an emphasis on display or the depth or both. And teachers are sensitive to this discourse that swings between true depth and performative display. When teachers are tuned to a child's reading, they see the early signs of development before they're actually evidenced in the data. A steadier gaze with a longer duration, a single sentence that flowed, a child willing to pick up a book rather than avoid reading. These are the signals of progress that teachers watch for. And pausing is appropriate because beneath the surface, coherence in reading is developing, strengthening, and beginning to underpin the fluency before it actually arrives. So now we're going to think about intervention, in fact, over-intervention, when performance replaces coherence. Fixed assessment cycles involving report cards and spreadsheets distort the perception of each child's individual development. Children's birthdays are sprinkled all year round, so the presumption that every child's development will follow a similar trajectory is kind of convenient, but it's untrue. There's a risk that if a child perceives that they're falling behind, they're more likely to compensate by clowning or trying harder or doing both of these things, which could lead to anxiety, fatigue, or disaffection. If the school boosts reading by encouraging a faster pace or heavy correction, then it's natural for that child to take the subtle decision to read for performance rather than coherence. When I'm working with children who are also being told to increase their rate of reading, there is tension between these two approaches. The child being instructed to read quickly rushes past punctuation, whereas the child who finds ease in reading observes punctuation without effort, and prosody emerges at the same time. And once again, the emphasis is on trusting that reading will become fluent and rewarding if we wait and watch for the signs that development is underway. So now I'm going to zone in on contextual and sensory alignment, how fluency actually emerges. Some children rely on contextual cues using illustrations or inference or reasoning more than sensory cues. Those are the phonemes and the shapes of words. And these cues are used to guide children's reading. And of course, the opposite is also true, with some children relying more on the sensory cues than the contextual cues. These two types of cues, contextual and sensory, must intersect in real time for reading to become coherent, fluent, and rewarding for the child. Teachers notice this happening when punctuation, prosody, and expression begin to emerge in isolated phrases and then spread quickly across the text. When there are inconsistencies at this fragile stage, this might be because the vocabulary is unfamiliar, the writing style may be too dense, the child's knowledge of the topic might not support their reading sufficiently, and they might have visual tracking or weak vision and need to have an eye test. The point is that fluency is not the product of many layers of processing, but the alignment of sensory and contextual information, just as it is in a conversation. And like a conversation, reading fluency relies on following the flow of information in real time. So now we're going to think about identifying the early signs of change in reading fluency. The solution to overwhelm is always to break the task down into manageable segments. And in reading, this impedes fluency because we must stop, zoom in, practice, zoom out, and restart the flow again. It's tedious to do this repeatedly. If coherence is weak, then this will be the predominant pattern, and fluency is unlikely to develop. But if the child simply needed help with vocabulary, the early signs of fluency may quickly follow, with less visible strain, more natural phrasing, greater stability and attention, increased willingness to read aloud, and engagement becomes visible. Each of these outcomes is a signal that the child is anticipating what comes next in their reading and in their learning. Alignment of sensory and contextual cues has clicked, allowing anticipation to drive reading fluency. So now I'm going to just hone in on a structured way to observe this early stage emerging fluency. Now, this is how I created the Reading Fluency Tracker. 10 years ago, a teaching assistant who had been hearing the rhythm for reading children in her school read aloud pulled me aside in the school corridor. She described all of the changes in their reading, and together the two of us made a list. There have been a few more additions to the list, but this is basically what we now use to track progress across the 10 weeks of the Rhythm for Reading programme. If you'd like a structured and discerning way to capture the early, often unseen signs of progress in your pupils' reading, you're really welcome to download the Reading Fluency Tracker. It's a practical tool that will help you, like me, notice and celebrate the small gains that lead to lasting reading fluency.